Today I will tell you about events that took place in 2009 in New York City. Join me as I recount the story of Shele Danishefsky. It all began in 1998 in New York, where 36-year-old Shele Danishefsky lived at the time. She was a young and beautiful woman, difficult to overlook. But Shelley was also very ambitious. After completing her studies in marketing, she began working in New York's financial sector. Gradually, she climbed the career ladder until she became a financial advisor. She was very successful in her role and was well regarded by the clients she worked with. Looking at her, one might say she was a woman of success, lacking nothing in life. However, the truth was different. She was already in her 30s but had still not found someone she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She was eager to start a family and have children. She was ready for it, but the ideal partner continued to elude her. In 1998, Shelley decided to take matters into her own hands and attended a singles event organized for people of the same faith as hers. It was there that she noticed a man who immediately caught her attention. He was very handsome, though she thought he must be much younger than her. When they began talking, it turned out she was right. The man's name was Rod Kovlin, and he was 11 years younger. But this didn't matter to her. As soon as they started talking, she knew he was the man she had been waiting for. She had never felt so connected to anyone as she did with him. Both felt an instant connection, to the point where they even considered driving to Las Vegas that night to get married. Shelley called her sister and told her about the man she had just met, and that they wanted to get married immediately. Her sister managed to convince her not to go through with it, saying the decision was too hasty. Shelley and Rod didn't get married that day, but their relationship developed rapidly. They were so captivated by each other that just 6 weeks after meeting they got engaged, and 6 months later they were married. Shelley's family wasn't sure if the rush was necessary, but she loved Rod so much that she wanted to become his wife as soon as possible. After the wedding, everything seemed perfect in their marriage. Shelley had no financial worries, so it wasn't a problem for her to move into a new apartment. They bought a place in New York, where they planned to soon welcome their first child. Shelley had long dreamed of having a child, and less than 2 years after the wedding, their first child, a daughter named Anna, was born. At that moment, Shelley was probably the happiest person in the world. She was successful at work, had a handsome and loving husband, and now a beautiful daughter. She lacked nothing to complete her happiness. Shortly after Anna's birth, it turned out that Shelley was pregnant again. Her and Rod's happiness grew even greater when they learned that she was expecting twins. Unfortunately, their joy didn't last long as complications arose during childbirth. One of the children died shortly after birth and the other survived only a few hours. The couple was devastated. It was a huge shock, and they didn't know how to cope with it. The stress that accompanied them during this time severely affected their marriage. They began arguing more frequently, especially since Shelley was increasingly bothered by the fact that her husband had not worked since the beginning of their marriage. Rod had graduated with a degree in civil engineering but never worked in his field, and it seemed he had no intention of doing so in the future. He had other plans for his life. He wanted to become a professional backgammon player. To pursue his dream, he spent most of his time honing his skills by playing online. This clashed with the few jobs he held during their marriage, which were short-lived. He mostly worked as a stockbroker, but only for brief periods because playing backgammon was his priority. Every time it ended the same way, with his employment contract being terminated because he spent too much time playing and often didn't show up at work, as he was busy with the game. But Rod didn't worry too much about being unemployed. He knew that Shelley earned a good income, and they could live off her salary alone. For most of the time since they got married, Rod didn't work professionally and dedicated his time to playing. Of course, this wasn't his only daily activity, as Rod also enjoyed going to the gym, often twice a day. Besides that, he did nothing, reaping the benefits of his wife's good earnings. Over time, this began to bother Shelley more and more, leading to more frequent arguments between the couple. However, despite their marriage no longer being as perfect as it once was, they decided to try for another child. A year and a half after the death of the twins, Shelley gave birth to a son named Miles. The arrival of their son did not improve the relationship between the spouses. While they were happy about his birth, Shelley had growing doubts about her husband. She knew he wasn't very hard-working and didn't care about finding any job. He continued to dream of a career as a professional backgammon player, dedicating all his free time to playing. He could play all night, even when they went out to visit friends or family. Even in such situations, he would bring the game with him or play it on his computer. It seemed that Rod had become obsessed with it. And because he did nothing other than play, Shelley could only dream of staying home with the children after their son was born. She had to return to work quickly to earn money for all the expenses. After all, she was the only breadwinner in the family. This situation started to bother her more and more, but that wasn't the worst part. Shortly after the couple celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Shelley discovered that her husband had been cheating on her with various women. While playing online, he made connections with different women who also enjoyed playing. After some time, he would meet up with them to cheat on his wife. Shelley found out about these affairs when Rod accidentally left an open email from one of these women on the computer. It seemed like he did it on purpose, as if he wanted Shelley to find out eventually. Things had not been going well in their marriage for a long time. Shelley was furious. But as if that wasn't enough, after she confronted him about everything, Rod decided to surprise her even more. He suggested that maybe it would be a good idea for them to see other people. He wanted their marriage to be open. Shelley couldn't believe what she was hearing. She realized that their marriage was over. She scheduled a meeting with a lawyer and tried to work out the details of the divorce, hoping to do it in a way that would minimize the impact on the children. She arranged everything with the lawyer, but for some reason she didn't file for divorce at that time. In the meantime, Rod continued to have affairs without even trying to hide it. He would disappear for entire nights, and when he returned, Shelley could smell women's perfume on him. He did this more and more often, meeting with dozens of women. One day, he contacted several women through Facebook, trying to arrange a date with one of them. His behavior made the atmosphere in their home unbearable, and Shelley longed for Rod to finally move out. But where would he go? He wasn't earning any money, had no savings, and couldn't even afford to rent a small apartment. He knew very well that his wife had the money, so he proposed a deal. He would move out of their shared apartment on the condition that she would rent the apartment that had just become available in the same building, practically across the hall from their home, and of course pay the rent. This way, he would be close to the children and have no trouble visiting and taking care of them. On one hand, Shelley didn't like the idea because it meant she would see Rod almost every day. But she thought it might be the best solution for their children. They would be able to see their father as often as they wanted and wouldn't have to experience the shock of him disappearing from their lives. After weighing the pros and cons, she decided to rent the apartment. Over time, it became clear that this wasn't the best decision because Rod would drop by their apartment whenever he wanted since he still had the keys. He also became increasingly aggressive. Their arguments became more frequent, and Shelley started to fear for her safety and the safety of her children. That's why she changed the locks to prevent her husband from having free access to her apartment. After doing so, she finally decided to file for divorce, something she had been planning for some time. This, of course, didn't sit well with Rod. If they divorced, he would no longer have access to his wife's money. Who would then fund his lifestyle? Despite his displeasure with the idea, he did nothing to try to convince his wife to save their marriage. Quite the opposite, he argued more and more often, leading Shelley to request a court order to limit his visits. She feared for the safety of her children and did not allow frequent visits. After the court's decision, little changed. Rod continued to behave irrationally, to the point where he once grabbed her by the neck, threatening to kill her one day. Another time, when he had the children in his care and was supposed to bring them back, they didn't return on time. Shelley tried to contact her husband, but he didn't answer the phone. She didn't know what to expect from him and started to fear for her children's safety. Sometime later, it turned out that Rod had taken them to the hospital, where he instructed them to say that their mother was mistreating them and inappropriately touching them. Of course, this was not true, and when the matter went to court, everyone could see what Rod was capable of. He was willing to do anything to control his wife's life, even if it meant manipulating his own children. After this incident, Rod was no longer allowed to meet with his children alone. Every time he wanted to visit or take care of them, it had to be in the presence of another person. Shelley no longer knew what to expect from him. At that time, he had become unpredictable, and she was increasingly afraid of him. However, she didn't know that her husband had installed an app on her phone that allowed him to track everything she did on his mobile. This way, he knew her every move. He could see what she wrote in messages to friends or family and could read all her emails. That's how he learned about what Shelley decided at the end of December 2009. She had had enough of his behavior and felt deeply betrayed by him. That's why she decided to change her will so that, in the event of her death, Rod wouldn't receive a single dollar. She informed her lawyer of this decision, and they scheduled an appointment for December 31st to take care of it. The will was supposed to be changed then. When she exchanged emails with the lawyer, she could not have known that their meeting would never happen. 2 days later, on December 31st, 2009, at around 7 a.m., Rod received a call from his 9-year-old daughter, Anna. She sounded very distressed. Stammering, she tried to tell him that something had happened to her mother. Fortunately, Rod lived nearby and immediately ran to their apartment. When he arrived, his daughter told him that her mother was in the bathroom. As soon as he opened the bathroom door, he saw his wife lying in the bathtub filled with water. But the water was all red, and she showed no signs of life. He immediately pulled her out of the tub and called 911. Following the instructions from the emergency operator, Rod began performing CPR until the paramedics arrived. When the paramedics took over, they quickly realized that, unfortunately, there was nothing more they could do. Shelley had been dead for several hours. Soon, the police arrived at the apartment, and Rod explained the whole situation to them. He told them about the call from his daughter, how he tried to save Shelley, and his suspicions about what might have happened. He noted that the door of a cabinet above the bathtub had been torn off its hinges, which could suggest that Shelley might have slipped in the tub. She may have tried to grab onto the cabinet door, but it just came off its hinges, causing her to fall. During the fall, she could have hit her head and lost consciousness, which ultimately led to her death. It seemed like a tragic accident. Rod's explanation seemed plausible, especially since the police also spoke with Anna, who said she hadn't noticed anything unusual either the previous evening or during the night. She even woke up during the night, though she wasn't sure what time it was, and heard someone taking a bath in the bathroom. When she peeked inside, she saw her mother lying in the tub with her head submerged in water, but she thought her mom was just washing her hair. Not thinking much of it, she went back to bed and fell asleep again. It wasn't until she woke up in the morning and went to the bathroom that she saw her mother still in the tub. She immediately understood that something was wrong and called her father right away. Everything the police heard from Rod and Anna led them to believe it was an unfortunate accident. Therefore, they didn't treat the apartment as a potential crime scene. There was nothing to suggest that someone else might have been responsible for the 47-year-old's death. Although there were a few scratches and bruises on her body, these could have occurred during the fall. Nothing alarming was found in the apartment, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence that someone had broken in. Believing it to be an accident, the police only took a few photos in the bathroom, but did not collect any fingerprints or DNA. They also didn't check the footage from the security cameras in the building. What really happened that night could have been clarified by an autopsy. It would have revealed whether she died from hitting her head, suffered a heart attack, or if there was another cause. But before the pathologist could start the autopsy, a rabbi representing her family called. Initially, the family wanted the autopsy to be done, but since her death was deemed an accident, according to their religion, an autopsy could not be performed. Therefore, the cause of death on the death certificate was listed as unknown. Shelley was buried very quickly, within 24 hours of her death, but doubts about how she died began to emerge just as quickly. Was it really an accident? Everyone knew that things were not going well between her and Rod and that they were in the process of getting divorced. But when the family started talking to her friends and acquaintances, they learned that she wanted to change her will so that her husband wouldn't inherit anything after her death. Since many people knew about this and there was a high probability that Rod might have found out as well, it was clear that the prospect of losing over $5 million was not something he would easily accept. This could have been a motive for him to take her life. But it wasn't just this that made the family increasingly suspicious. It was also puzzling that Shelley's phone couldn't be found anywhere in the apartment. If she had only gone to take a bath, she should have left it somewhere. It was nowhere to be found, but 5 weeks after her death, the phone suddenly reappeared on the nightstand in the bedroom. There was no way it could have been missed earlier. It was also strange that she had taken a bath that night. For one, those who knew her well were aware that she wasn't a fan of baths, she always preferred showers. But that alone wasn't conclusive. What made the family even more suspicious was what they learned from her friends. On December 30th, Shelley had undergone a keratin hair straightening treatment, after which it's recommended not to wash the hair for at least 2 days. So what sense would it make for her to take a bath that same day and ruin what the hairdresser had just done a few hours earlier? It didn't make any sense at all. These doubts led to the decision to exhume the body for an autopsy. The family began to suspect that Shelley might have been murdered and wanted to know exactly what happened on December 31st. 2 months after her death, her body was back in the morgue. The same pathologist performed the autopsy, and the first thing he noticed were scratches on her face and PTIA in her eyes, indicating that she might have been strangled. Further examination confirmed this, revealing that her hyoid bone was broken. This was not an accident, it was murder. Naturally, Rod was the prime suspect, but there was no evidence to prove that he had killed his wife. When the police decided to thoroughly search the apartment where Shelley had lived, it was already 6 months after her death. Everything had been meticulously cleaned, leaving no chance of finding anything that could confirm their suspicions about Rod. Since no samples had been collected from the apartment earlier, all they had to rely on were the photos taken in the bathroom at the time. Indeed, there were several details that didn't add up. For instance, there was no bath towel in the bathroom, where one would typically expect to find one. There was also no shampoo or conditioner nearby. They were found in the shower. But these findings were just small details that could support the theory that Shelley had been killed, though they did not provide concrete evidence that Rod was the one who did it. Investigators tried to determine what Rod was doing that night and found out that, like many nights before, he had been playing an online game. He was playing with Deborah, whom he had met through the game and had been dating for some time. They usually played almost all night, but on December 31st, around 1 a.m., Rod decided to stop playing. He claimed he was tired and wanted to go to bed. But it seems that wasn't entirely true, because around 4 a.m., he went down to the building's lobby, where he chatted briefly with the doorman and asked for a candy bar. This was unusual behavior for Rod, who typically wasn't the type to engage in conversation with the doorman. The doorman even said that Rod usually didn't pay any attention to him, let alone strike up a conversation. It seemed as though Rod had deliberately gone down there to be seen by the doorman, possibly to establish an alibi. Since the investigators had no solid evidence against Rod, he remained free, and the investigation stalled for several years. During this time, Rod continued his relationship with Deborah, but they did not live together. She lived in her own house while Rod stayed with his parents, who were taking care of his children. He continued to behave aggressively, which is why it was decided that Anna and Miles would remain under their grandparents' care. Rod constantly pondered how he could get his hands on the money his wife had left behind. Her estate was worth over $5 million, and Rod made no secret of his desire to use that money. However, he had no access to cash from the account, and the only thing he could do was use the money in the children's accounts. He and Shelley had set up accounts for their children to save money for their education. There was about $80,000 in those accounts, and after his wife's death, Rod withdrew all the money. But this wasn't enough for him. He kept thinking about how he could make all those millions his own. He considered all sorts of plans to get the money. One of his ideas involved hiring someone to kidnap Anna and take her to Mexico, where she would marry a Mexican man. Another plan was to frame Anna for Mother's death. He thought about sending an email from her account in which she would confess that there had been an argument between her and her mother that night, and that she had pushed her, leading to her death. Anna would be blamed for it. These ideas became increasingly irrational, and Rod was losing control more and more often. His parents had had enough and decided to kick him out of their home. They believed it would be better for the children not to see him every day. Rod was so unpredictable that they couldn't be sure he wouldn't harm someone. Needless to say, Rod didn't take this well. He was furious when he found out that his parents had changed all the locks, leaving him unable to enter the house. Not only was he barred from his family home, but his parents had also taken full custody of the children. It wasn't that Rod missed them terribly. What mattered more was that they were his ticket to fortune. He knew he had to do something to regain custody of the children. But as long as his parents were alive, this would be impossible, so he decided the only solution was to get rid of them. But how? His ideas ranged from poisoning them to setting fire to their house while they were inside. He shared all these ideas with Deborah, who became increasingly terrified by what she was hearing. Fearing for her own safety, she began recording their conversations.
Because you steal from your children. You stole before.
You're stealing their college money.
They won't be able to get to college by the time you're done with them. And you said you didn't care if they went to college. Why don't you tell Anna that every penny you're spending right now is her money and Miles' money?
That Shelley
Wait.
worked.
Hold on a second, Anna. I'd like you to come here. Hold on a second. Come here, please.
Because you haven't
come out
worked
here.
5 years. In the 12 years
could
you were
you
married,
please stop talking?
you never worked. Your mother worked her off for every penny that he's spending. Let me tell you, the Danishefskys are not wrong. They may be wrong about something, not the money.
Miles,
Your
same
mother
here. Anna, come here.
worked and worked and worked, and your father sat on his he's doing now. He
Come here.
refuses to get a
He
job.
refuses to get a
Come
job.
Come here.
He's spending your
Come
money.
here. Okay. First of all,
He's spending your money.
Yes,
okay.
but
What you're
tell
saying
you
now,
not to.
what you are saying now in front of Anna and Miles, okay, will ensure that you never see my children again if you continue. Okay?
You threatened us with your
No,
children.
no, I'm not
for 11
threatening.
years.
I'm telling
I want
you,
you out of the
excuse
house
me.
by October 1st.
Okay, evict
Out.
me. Evict me.
I went down
For
to
11
court.
years.
Go
Papers,
get,
I
go.
will file.
Fine, file the
11
papers.
years.
Evict
You
me.
threatened me with your
Evict
children.
me. Evict me. Excuse me.
I spent-
Evict me. Evict me. Evict me.
You know
Evict
what,
me.
Anna?
Excuse me?
I spent $1 million of my money to make sure you didn't go to the Danishefsky.
No, you spend $1 million of Bonnie's money.
I owe the money.
Ah, you're
I
never
owe
going to
the
pay
money.
that money.
I'm going to pay
Yes,
the money.
we are.
You're
I'm
never
not
going to
like
pay me
you.
back.
I'm
Come
not
on,
a deadbeat.
out.
You're going to steal
Okay.
from me.
Because you're a deadbeat.
Okay.
You're going to steal from me like you steal from your children.
Whenever she had the chance, she recorded Rod's statements. And when the couple broke up in 2014, she decided to go to the police and share everything she had recorded so far. Although there was nothing in the recordings that directly implicated him in Shelley's death, investigators could see the kind of person Rod truly was. He didn't care about his loved ones. Money was his only priority, and he couldn't control his anger, often descending into fits of rage. By the end of 2015, it seemed that enough circumstantial evidence had been gathered to charge the 42-year-old Rod with the murder of his wife, and he was arrested in November. He was just 2 months short of collecting the money from his wife's insurance policy. Shelley was insured for $1.6 million, but since it was known that she had been murdered, Rod could have received the money 6 years after her death, provided he wasn't charged with Shelley's murder during that time. The money would have been deposited into his account on December 31st, but he was arrested on November 1st. The trial began only in 2019, 10 years after Shelley's death. There was no physical evidence directly linking Rod to the crime. The case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, but what the investigators had managed to gather over the years led the jury to find Rod guilty of murdering his wife. Rod was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Interestingly, his children did not believe that their father could be responsible for their mother's death. They maintained his innocence. However, regardless of their beliefs, Rod remains in prison, and all attempts at appeals were promptly denied. After a rejected appeal in 2022, Anna wrote a letter to the district attorney expressing her continued support for her father and her belief in his innocence.